for interested parties both during and after the meeting. As I just mentioned a minute ago, I'll just read from the script here. I'm sure all of us are now more accustomed to electronic meetings than we would have imagined we ever would have been. But as a reminder, please mute your audio when not speaking. It'll make it clear for our recording. In keeping with the electronic meeting guidelines amended as part of House Bill 29, we have a shorter agenda today, but we will conduct roll call votes for those requiring commission action rather than just all in favor say aye. So we'll do roll call votes. First, Patrick is going to review the guidelines for conducting the commission meeting via electronic means. Patrick?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you see in the memo there, it just outlines the basic requirements for the Regional Commission to hold an electronic meeting during a state of emergency. RRRC does not have an electronic meeting policy outside of a state of emergency, and so that's why I have that outlining just our role and what the requirements are for us to hold these meetings. The main three things are to give notice to the public using the best available method. That was done for this meeting. We have a media list that we send to, we publish on our website, and then when we send the agendas out to you all, we also have a list of people that receive those agendas that they can sign up for. And we've made arrangements for public access by a video conference or by a YouTube stream of this meeting right now. And for public comments, we had an email option for public comments prior to the meeting. And then the last thing is we'll comply with the requirements of State Code 2.2-3708.2, and specifically, as Mayor Coiner mentioned, holding roll call votes and also limiting the agenda items to the statutorily required or the items necessary to continue operations of the commission.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Now we'll do a roll call. Of course, we've already determined quorum, but we'll do it officially. And before we do that, I'd like to welcome two new members to the commission today. Mr. Tom Underwood, Culpeper County Board of Supervisors, and Mr. Theodore Voorhees. Yes. And Mr. Theodore Voorhees, Orange County Administrator. Gentlemen, welcome you to the Regional Commission. I look forward to working with both of you, hopefully in person soon. Patrick, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. And I'm going to, all of you that are on computer can unmute. I'm going to unmute those of you that called on the phone. I might have had to mute you just prior to this. So, but I've got a list here as well. Mr. Ashby, Mr. Butler, Mayor Catlin, Mayor Coiner.
Here.
Mr. Crozier.
Here.
Mr. Curry.
Here.
Mr. Egerton.
Here.
Mr. Hively.
Here.
Mr. Hobbs.
Here.
Ms. Hoffman. Mayor Lamar. Mr. Malone. Mr. McCullough.
Here.
Mayor Roby.
Here.
Ms. Schaefer.
Here.
Ms. Smith. Ms. Taylor. Mr. Underwood.
Here.
Mr. Voorhees.
Here.
Mr. Wood. I see Mr. Wood, and I think everyone else can if you see him. And Mr. Woods.
Here.
You do have a quorum.
Oh, thanks, Patrick. Okay, first thing we need to do is to approve the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda that was distributed prior to the meeting? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second. Who that was, Patrick?
I have Mr. Hobbs and Mr. McCullough.
Okay. We've got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? And let's have a roll call vote, please.
Mayor Coiner.
Aye.
Mr. Crozier.
Might remind
Sorry.
me about mute. If they're on the
Yeah.
call and not answering, they might be muted, Patrick.
Well, and I think I muted him. Mr. Kosher?
Okay.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Curry?
Aye.
Mr. Eggertson?
Aye.
Mr. Hively?
Aye.
Mr. Hobbs?
Aye.
Mr. McCullough?
Aye.
Mayor Roby?
Aye.
Ms. Schaefer?
Aye.
Mr. Underwood?
Aye.
Mr. Voorhees?
Aye.
Mr. Wood? And Mr. Woods?
Aye.
Unanimous amongst
Excuse
those
me, Pat?
participating. Yes.
Hey, Patrick, this is Chris Butler. I'm sorry, I couldn't get my Zoom to work. I'm having technical difficulties, but I am obviously on the call.
Great, thank you. And I've got you marked down now with your phone number. Appreciate that, Mr. Butler.
Okay, so that was a unanimous. Now, did Mr. Butler vote as well as inform us, Patrick?
No, but I'll offer him that opportunity now on the agenda, Mr. Butler.
Aye.
Okay, so we got a unanimous there, Patrick?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All righty. Y'all know this is fun. This is the most fun I've ever had. I just love these electronic meetings. I just want to go on record as saying that. This is really fun. And, you know, it's as fun as we can make it, but let's take care of business. Public comment. Public comments were requested via email in advance of the meeting. Patrick, were any comments received?
They were not, no public comments received prior to the 12:30 requested deadline.
Thanks, Patrick. And that's the way we really need to work it, right? Is there any public here that would like to address us? Would we take it that way, or would we rather have it?
That was the way for this meeting that we put it in place. We don't have
Okay.
the option for comments
Okay,
through the.
well then I don't want to, you know, for someone that might have missed the deadline and didn't think they could address us today, I wouldn't want to flip-flop. So we'll move ahead. Next is approval of minutes, which are the minutes from the February 26th commission meeting and the April 27th executive committee meeting. They're included in your packets. If there are no changes, I would request a motion for approval of these minutes. And if it's one or the other, we'll just pull those minutes out and talk about it. But if not, I'll entertain a motion to approve both.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second. Second.
Okay. Okay, we've got a motion and a second to approve the minutes of both the executive committee and the commission back in February. Is there any discussion? Okay, let's have a roll call vote on the approval of the minutes, please.
Mr. Butler,
Aye.
Mayor Coiner,
All right, let me stop it right there. You know, I have a little more time to think when I'm not talking. For all of those that weren't on the executive committee meeting, I'm not sure we should combine these. They're in a position of approving minutes that they're not in a position to approve. So either we need to vote with the understanding that non-executive committee members are voting only for February, if we don't want to go through the roll call twice, and the other ones are voting for both, or we need to vote twice. You know, I don't want people having to vote for minutes that they can't actually vote for. So can we vote that way with the assumption that their aye vote means they're voting for only the meeting that they observed?
I would probably advise to.
Twice. Do you want to go through it twice?
I would probably advise to, in that case, just vote on the February 26th minutes and hold the executive committee minutes for a future either executive committee meeting or I don't want to lead you astray on that one.
That's fine. No big hurry on the executive committee. I agree with that. It just seemed funny, folks voting for minutes they didn't really have access to. So we are voting for the 24th commission meeting minutes, and now we're voting to approve those. If you want to start calling the roll again.
Okay. Mr. Butler,
Aye.
Mayor Coiner,
Aye.
Mr. Crozier,
Aye.
Mr. Curry,
Aye.
Mr. Curry,
Aye.
Mr. Eggertson,
Aye.
Mr. Hively,
Aye.
Mr. Hobbs,
Aye.
Mr. McCullough,
Aye.
Mayor Roby,
Aye.
Ms. Schaefer,
Aye.
Mr. Underwood.
Abstain because I was not present.
Yes, sir. Noted. Thank you. Mr. Voorhees.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Wood. Mr. Woods.
I have to abstain too. Abstain.
All right. Unanimous. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 11 votes for, 3 abstentions. So it passes.
Thanks, Patrick. Not to be a stickler, but it's a little cleaner. Thanks. And
Nope,
thanks,
understand.
everyone. Okay, so it's approved. Thank you. The minutes are approved. Next, financial reports. Patrick, would you review the fiscal year 2020, the current year financial report through May?
Yes, sir. I'm going to share my screen for those of you that are on computer, just so you've got a copy of what we're reviewing here, and also for the benefit of the live stream as well. The fiscal year 2020 year-to-date revenues and expenditures are through May 31st. As I sort of outlined in the memo, that's the first month or so, month and a half after the COVID-19 state of emergency. You know, the commission's revenues are not as affected in terms of, the first month and a half here and as a result of that emergency. But what we've really been paying attention to is our grant sources with our state agency partners. So we've seen a little bit of drop here just because of some requests to kind of extend grant funds into fiscal year 2021. As you see in the memo there, 86% on the revenues through the end of May. And that's primarily because of 2 things, both outlined there. One is the Chesapeake Bay PDC capacity grant is actually a contract through the end of the calendar year. And so we'll be reimbursed for those costs and those expenditures that we've made on staff time, salary, and wages. But it won't be until into the new fiscal year. And also with the rideshare grant, the DRPT rideshare grant, they've asked us to extend that into fiscal year 2021 just because of the uncertainty at the state level. On expenditures as well, 82%. So we're slightly net positive through May, and I expect that to continue through June to just have a slight net positive for the whole fiscal year. There are a couple of things that I do want to note on the expenditures is just the previously discussed the overage on the health and dental insurance, and that's specifically related to mid-year changes, new staff hires that did sign on to the insurance, as well as some mid-year changes for current staff. And the other item is the office maintenance budget, which has also gone over, primarily related to the conference room remodel project, which in retrospect, I remember this question coming up when the budget was passed a year ago from Mr. Walker from Culpeper County, and it fit into the 10,000 for the project. Project was well beneath that, but with the other expenses throughout the year, did exceed that amount. But those are one-time expenses that will not be seen next year. Other than that, there's no other line items that really jump out at me. We will be lower than expected or than budgeted on payroll. So any of the overage items will be made up in other line items that have shortfalls. So I'm happy to answer any further questions as well.
Okay, hearing none, Patrick, I think you've just made it so clear we don't have any questions. So thank you for that. Would you move on to the executive director?
Sure, and I apologize for not including the director's report in the packet. It was one of those things where things have been moving along pretty quickly, and I wanted to actually give myself some more time just to make sure that nothing changed between last Wednesday and today. Just a couple of notes that I do want to share with the commissioners. And some of these have been shared with you by email in between the last meeting in April, the executive committee meeting, and now. But we did hire a regional planner to replace Joe Costello, who left in January. Matthew Decatur began work on May 26th. Not sure he's on the call today. He has jumped in with both feet on rural transportation, GIS, and some environmental planning, and has really been in the first month here. It's been a strange time to sort of onboard a new employee, but he's done really well in coming on board and doing exactly what we need for the past month or so. The majority of our staff is continuing to telework at least part of the week. We've had a lot of individuals, especially that are working together on projects, that have started to come in jointly into the office so they can meet individually or as a group, specifically on the housing side of things. But we do have people that continue to telework. But the offices, we do have people in every day. Phones are being answered, and everyone is responsive to email and voicemail as well. On the homelessness and affordable housing side, I would say this is the area where we've been the most active and has been the most impact in terms of just commission staff time. We've had a lot of requests from DHCD, who is the state agency in charge of the funding, to provide budget estimates in terms of what would it cost to house, the current homeless population in the region. What do you need in terms of capacity, whether it's at the commission, but more likely at service providers. So we've been having a lot of back and forth with DHCD on that topic. The funding that flowed originally through the CARES Act and from the state, when the state of emergency was put in place and the stay-at-home order from Governor Northam, there was money that flowed to the Culpeper Housing and Shelter Services to shelter unsheltered individuals and households in hotels or motels. That has resulted in putting over 100 people at various times into motels, primarily in the Culpeper area, although also in some of the other parts of the region where that's possible. And that's one area where there is still a large amount of funding flowing to our Foothills Housing Network partners. And that, we've been in touch with our partners at Culpeper County and also the town, just about trying to figure out what the long-term solution might be for some of those individuals. I would note that the eviction moratorium ends on June 28th. And as I'm sure most of you are aware, that's been in place for over 3 months now. And there is going to be funding made available to People Incorporated, which will be for a rent and eviction assistance kind of funding program, so that when we see those impacts of the courts reopening and evictions moving forward, there is a funding source potentially for landlords and tenants to address some of those concerns. On the environmental side, a couple of grants went in just in the past 2 months. One was addressed by the executive committee in April, and that's the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant that the commission was the lead agency on, partnering with Friends of the Rappahannock and then Town of Warrenton and Fauquier County, and with the potential for a good amount of actually implementation funds to put in some BMPs, mostly around the town and in schools around in Fauquier County, to address some of their MS4 requirements with stormwater. So we should know more about that in the fall, but it was one that was put together back in April. And then we also partnered with American Farmland Trust, who was the lead on a local foods promotion program grant, which potentially would be looking at analyzing and looking at optimizing the local meat production and inventorying the facilities and what's available for that. So we'll have more information on that again, probably in the fall would be when that announcement comes out. We would just be in a support role for that grant. And then on transportation, we're assisting various localities with smart scale in different ways. With Fauquier County, we served as the applicant for pre-applications for 3 transportation projects, 2 at I-66 near Marshall, and then 1 on Route 29, 3 projects that the county had. And they've also got 4 additional projects that we'll be bringing back a letter of support for in August. We're also have a call tomorrow with Orange County staff and have talked with Madison County staff about assisting them with data entry into the smart portal for smart scale. So it's potential that we'll be assisting both of those counties with just getting the full applications entered into the smart scale process, which is due by August 3rd. And we will have a resolution for supporting local projects at our August meeting. There was an extension granted for those resolutions by the Commonwealth Transportation Board last week. So we'll bring that back to you in August for resolutions of support for smart scale projects. As I mentioned, Matt Decatur has come on board, and one of his first tasks has been to get our 2045 Rural Long Range Transportation Plan update underway. So he's working on kind of updating the demographics, the background information. And as we move through the summer and into the fall, we will be reaching out to each of you locally as well as your staffs just to review some of the priorities and other items that go into that long range plan. The last one was adopted in 2011 and has had some periodic updates since then, but is something that we need a full update on. And so that's sort of his priority as he's been here for the first month or so. And just a couple last things to close with. One is I did send information around to each of you about a successful hazard mitigation grant that we received from VDEM and FEMA for a wildfire analysis that will feed into our hazard mitigation plan. I'm currently reviewing just the contract and agreement documents with VDEM and expect that to be signed off on in July. But that's probably a project that will begin later this year and will take up most of 2021. Which is actually good timing in terms of fitting into our next update of the hazard mitigation plan. So that's positive news on the grant front. And the regional housing study has taken up a large part of this year. That's funded through a grant from Virginia Housing Development Authority. And we continue to move through that pretty well, considering the impacts of not being able to have in-person meetings and also not being able to do in-person interviews. I know many of you that are on the call today may have spoken with our consultants at Camoin 310. They've conducted, I think, between 20 and 25 interviews so far with local government and housing stakeholders. And I think we're moving through that process, again, despite some of the barriers that put in place by COVID-19, but expect that to remain on timeline to finish up by the end of the year. So it continues to progress, and I'm pleased with the way that process is moving forward. So, and happy to answer any questions on any other activities that the staff has been involved in. We've certainly been involved in various COVID-19 and CARES Act related discussions with some of you and other partners throughout the region. But again, happy to go through anything else that might be on your mind.
This is Tom Underwood. Was wondering, could you give it a little more detail on, I believe you mentioned a meat production grant that we're a partner in?
Yes, sir, Mr. Underwood. It was actually American Farmland Trust is the lead partner on a grant application to the USDA Local Foods Promotion Program. And one of the things they want to do, and they brought us on board as well as some other partners, I think some of the maybe Fauquier County and potentially Piedmont Environmental Council. What they want to do is, and this is reading straight from their kind of executive summary, is just analyze the existing local meats value chain, and which includes production, transportation, processing, and marketing. And they want to use that to develop strategies to maximize the results from the value chain. Excuse me. I think the commission's role would really be to do some surveying, to assist with, kind of data analysis, building off of our 2015 Farm and Food System Plan. American Farmland Trust, who is Jacob Gilley, is their kind of regional liaison here that works with us and our food council, would be the lead on that and would be reaching out to farmers. But I think it really is looking at what are the opportunities as well as what are the existing infrastructure in the region. We know there's a little bit of especially processing infrastructure, but seeing what might benefit the meat producers in the region.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I know that for local production or processing capacity is constrained relative to demand right now. So if you're calling up Faulkner's Finest or anyone else, it will take you several months to be able to get beef processed or any other meat at their facilities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Patrick?
No, sir, that's all I had for today.
Okay, thanks for that. Very informative, always helpful. Thanks, Patrick. Now we're into new business. And the first item is fiscal year 2021 agency budget and work plan. As you all know, COVID-19 has impacted each of our localities. We all continue to adjust and respond to budget changes. Patrick, can you review the draft budget for the commission and specifically where adjustments have been made with regard to the pandemic?
Yes, sir. And I tried to lay out the memo that was submitted with the agenda and with the board packet just in two ways. The first, kind of just reviewing the budget as it stands right now, which is projected revenues at $914,000, about $450. That's conservative. I'm not, including grants that, traditionally haven't been awarded or ones that we have out there. I would note on the page showing the draft revenues, we do have a lot of pending grants that are out there. We have applications in. That includes a couple for DRPT for technical assistance for transportation demand management and transit study. We've got the NIFWIF grant, a CARE Corps grant that was approved from the executive committee in April, as well as the PDC budget increase and the state budget, which is currently on hold, as you all know. So the revenues that are put there are basically based on items that we are strong on and that we're solid on, that we feel comfortable about. It's about the same as it usually is for the past couple of years, where it's not as much as our ending budget for the current fiscal year, but it actually is about 10 to 12,000 higher than our initial budget for this current fiscal year last June. So in general, that's about right. We expect to see some additional funds come in throughout the year as grant applications are successful. But I think in terms of the total amount, it's about on par with where we've been the last couple of years. The notes I would make, then I would especially highlight since the April executive committee meeting, are a couple of additional items related to revenues. One is the VDEM wildfire analysis grant, which I mentioned. I expect that to be, it's about 10 or 11,000 total. I don't know that we'll bill all of that back in the next fiscal year. Some might carry into FY 2022. So it's a little bit lower than the total grant on the current revenue budget that's presented. I also note the VHDA COVID-19 emergency grant. This is one where we'll receive about $21,000, and about $18,000 of that will be passed through to a couple of our Foothills Housing Network homeless services provider partners. This was one where, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen a lot of money flow through for direct client services from DHCD, but there hasn't been as much available for capacity. And frankly, for some of the money that the CARES Act has allowed local governments and others to put in place, just social distancing guidelines, and whether you're putting in plastic guards at a barrier at a lobby, or just have some of those kind of building costs built in. So a couple of our partners will receive those funds as pass through. The commission will see about $3,000 worth of funding here to support just the admin on that grant, as well as some expenses that we've incurred for software and hardware purchases for people to work from out of the office that we can get reimbursed through that grant for. And the other one that I would mention is the Path Mobility Management Transportation Collaborative Funds. This is funding that we've received some amount this year, but we expect that to go up. And right now it's budgeted at $40,000 based on a request and a positive response we've received from the Path Foundation so far on that grant. So that was also added into the revenues. I did remove, as requested by the executive committee in April, the dues that are shown for the FY 2021 budget are at the FY 2020 rate, which is lower for most of the jurisdictions. For Rappahannock County and the town of Washington, it's actually the amount that would have been billed in FY 2021, since that was the lower of the two numbers. And so that is incorporated at the request of the executive committee. And then I also note that removed funds for the Farm to School Liaison project that has been discussed since February, I think, when we brought it up with the commission. I would note that both of the funding sources for that, No Kid Hungry Virginia and the Path Foundation, remain very supportive of the project, but between the commission and those two funding sources, as well as the 5 county school system food services directors, we all agreed that right now is not the time to try to implement something like that, with the uncertainty around school systems even and going back and what their schedule is going to be and their budget impacts as well. So we are hopeful that that may be something that comes back around again around the winter time next year, that we can kind of bring back up, because we feel like it's a strong project that should go forward when the time is right. On the expense side, again, everything is balanced. We don't have any, excuse me, we don't have any projected contribution to the reserve based on the current budget. But I would note just a couple of items that are changed since April. And one is the removal of that farm to school position. So that dropped down the payroll and FICA and insurance line item budgets or line item costs without that position. Also, am suggesting or requesting an increase in the equipment and software expense. One of the things that we found in responding to the state of emergency and telework is that, most of our staff is still working off desktops. We have some Chromebooks that were available for them just to do basic computing and email and things like that initially. But certainly one thing we found is that we may look at beginning the transition to a laptop environment so that people do have the ability, not only for teleworking, but also when we're going out and back into communities and working with you all at local governments to have the ability to do presentations, things like that. So there is an increase in the equipment software expense for next year. And then as well, just the addition of the expenses related to the COVID-19 emergency grant that I just referenced. The last thing I'll say, if you've seen through the projected revenues, and this is just the breakdown by category, the last thing I'll say is that we continue to be the local dues at 83 cents and based on the 2016 population for most of you, and then the 2018 for Rappahannock County and Washington it's just below 16%. So even without the additional funds coming in yet from grants, we're at a good rate there, I think. So every dollar from all of you combined that comes in, we're able to leverage about $6 at this point. I hope by the end of the fiscal year that'll be that percentage will be even lower, and that will be more about 13 or 14%, which is where it's been historically at the end of fiscal years. And then the other thing I would note on the revenues is just that, a lot of our funding comes directly from the state budget. And so that's something that I've been keeping an eye on. We've been having conversations with our state agency partners daily, if not, or weekly, if not daily, just keeping an eye on what the impacts of the state are going to be, specifically on some of our programs that do receive that direct state funding rather than, federal pass-through or other sources. So we're continuing those discussions and we'll continue to do that as well. And I'm happy to answer any questions about the work plan as well. It's similar to the past couple of years. I will say we go through and I go through an update based on the new projects coming in. The one thing I would note here is just the staff allocation of time. The work plan here kind of sets out how much time we're planning on or that we have allocated to these projects. And I think one thing that's particularly helpful for me is to go through and review how those percentages, how they match up to what we see on the grant funding for our services. So, and that typically, like for agriculture and environmental, it's 11% of allocated hours. The grant funds make up about 7%. And so what that should tell you and what you can take from that is that we do prioritize that with some of the local dues that you bring in, some of our discretionary funds. We sort of offset some of the where grants can't cover in some of those categories. So if you look through that, that's where that comes into play and how I use it from a management perspective. I'm happy to answer questions about the budget. As you all know, this will change throughout the year. We're hopeful that it goes up, and I think I'm feeling confident that it will, but we often don't see the impacts from something like the COVID-19 pandemic until next fiscal year. As the state budget, again, continues to adjust, that will be something that we keep an eye on and continue to monitor throughout the year. So.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Any comments from anyone? Questions from Patrick?
Yes, Jim Crozier here.
Yep, yeah, Jim.
Chairman Pointer.
Yeah.
I do have one comment. We may want to look at working on a continuity of operations plan for the commission. Some of the things Patrick brought up were the lack of computers for staff, everything else, and obviously, if for some reason there were to be some sort of a emergency at the commission where the building was not usable and staff had to be off-site in the future for other things, something we may want to start looking at and looking at funding.
Okay. Certainly start planning. Yeah. Okay.
Right. I mean, absolutely. Just, I think it's something Patrick's been interested in looking at for quite some time, and this entire situation has brought it to light where it's really important that we start working on that and get something implemented.
Well, I definitely think it's important that we identify solutions to anything presented to us, and we have those in place as part of our planning. And we also have numbers attached to them. So whether we start, funding or whether we, however we handle that end of it, we need to at least know what's in front of us, both money-wise and the actual plan. So, hey, we're all planners, or at least we love planning, or I guess we wouldn't be doing this. So, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Patrick, is this something that we would need, you would need our support for to bring us something, or is there time for that? Do we need to, for this aspect of what Jim brought up, do you need anything from us, either a consensus or anything?
I don't think so. No, I appreciate the suggestion from Mr. Crozier, and I agree that it would be beneficial. And it's sort of where, as I've looked at how things have gone, again, with most staff teleworking and with people in and out of the office and available in that way. I think it's something that I've sort of started to, have some ideas on anyways, and could put something together. I don't think you need to, other than saying, yes, this is a good idea and bring us something in the future, I don't think you need to do anything beyond that. And I'm happy to put that together. So. Okay. All right. Okay, folks. Well, then any other questions or comments? Patrick, for the budget, then we're in a position to adopt the 21 commission budget and work plan. Is there a motion to adopt the plan as presented to us? And
So moved.
Okay, you got the names on those, Patrick?
I heard Mr. Crozier. Who was the other one? Mr. Hively, maybe?
Butler.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Butler.
Okay. We've got a motion and a second to approve the budget and work plan. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, let's have a roll call vote, please, Patrick.
Sir. Mr. Butler?
Aye.
Mayor Coiner?
Aye.
Mr. Crozier?
Aye.
Mr. Curry?
Aye.
Mr. Eggertson?
Aye.
Mr. Hively?
Aye.
Mr. Hobbs? Mr. McCullough?
Aye.
Mayor Roby?
Aye.
Ms. Schaefer?
Aye.
Mr. Underwood?
Aye.
Mr. Voorhees?
Aye.
Mr. Wood? Mr. Woods?
Aye.
All right, Mayor Coiner, that's a unanimous vote.
Thank you very much, and thank all of y'all for that. And thank you for working up, as usual, a really good budget, Patrick, with a good explanation of it. Next item, we have a request for consideration of a grant application to the U.S. Economic Development Administration for SEDS planning. Patrick, will you summarize this request for the commission?
Yes, sir. As outlined in the cover memo, as part of the CARES Act, Congress passed in response to COVID-19 pandemic, there was additional funding provided to the U.S. Economic Development Administration's Public Works and Economic Adjustment Assistance Program. And there's a lot of acronyms included there, but one of the things that's fundable through this program is a comprehensive economic development strategies plan. And those are usually completed at a regional level. In Virginia, I think normally at the PDC level, at a regional commission level is often the organization that takes the lead on it. And it's one of the development of those plans is an eligible activity under that grant program. Historically, the commission and the Rappahannock-Rapidan region, we do not have a SEDS in place right now. We're one of just a few regions in Virginia that does not have one of those plans. Charlottesville, Fredericksburg, Northern Virginia are several others that are in that also do not have a plan in place. And the reason that it comes back to the commission for consideration today is kind of twofold. One is that, again, we don't have a SEDS in place, and it does not allow us frankly, does not allow some of our localities to apply for the funding through the EDA, for the U.S. Economic Development Administration. One example is in relation to this CARES Act funding that was passed. One of the priorities is broadband, and Mr. Voorhees and I traded a couple of emails on, Orange County and frankly, all of the counties in the region's interest in pursuing broadband and looking for funding sources to diversify those funding pots that they have available. And without the SEDS in place, it's not an impossible task, but it's much harder to apply for this specific funding program. So I look at it as a long-term opportunity to have put a SEDS in place that would open up additional funding sources for localities, for the Regional Commission, and for some of our other partners. The other piece is that it does, as part of the CARES Act, does require at least an inclusion or focus on pandemic response and specifically to those industries and areas that have been impacted by the pandemic, by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it's an opportunity for the commission to be involved in that recovery effort and sort of the response to the pandemic from just a greater level than we have been so far. And then the last thing that I would say is specifically frankly from a financial perspective, one of the reasons that I think the commission has not really pursued a SEDS plan in the past is that the normal funding through EDA for these programs requires a 50% match. So a $120,000 grant or $120,000 project requires $60,000 in match, which can be in kind or cash. But frankly, the commission hasn't really been in position to make that sort of investment. The CARES Act funding has lowered that match to 20% match. And so a $120,000 project would require a $20,000 to $25,000 match, which is much more palatable, I think, to myself as the director, but also just looking at our finances would be something that we could much easier come up with. Sort of as I've outlined, I've shared this information with a lot of the local economic development directors and local economic development staff at the counties, as well as county administrators and town managers. I've also had some conversations with our partners at Central Virginia Partnership for Economic Development and Thomas Jefferson PDC in Charlottesville about the potential for a joint application since the Charlottesville region does not have a SEDS either. And what both the director at TJPDC and myself have said is that we're interested in, if there's a reason to apply together, if that benefits our chances, then we'd be willing to do that. But we also feel strongly that both regions need their own plan. It's not something where we want to see a plan that covers from Fauquier County all the way to Nelson County. It's just too large of a region for this sort of thing and loses some of the benefits of frankly, what makes this region different from the Charlottesville region. So we've had some conversations with EDA staff in Virginia, and they've been supportive of this. I was actually on a call this morning with other PDCs throughout the state, and the EDA staff person in Virginia has said that multi kind of co-applicant technique is one that would definitely be competitive for this program. She also indicated that the Philadelphia office of the EDA, which is what covers Virginia, has sort of prioritized this competitive funding that they've been allocated to areas that have not received EDA funds before. So as I mentioned, there's 10 or 11 of the PDCs in Virginia are designated economic development districts and receive EDA funding. And in the case of the CARES Act, actually are going to receive some non-competitive just allocations that they can use for projects or additional planning in response to the pandemic. So I think we stand a pretty good chance, given that there's never been any EDA funding that's come into the region. But I think for today, what I'm asking for is sort of a commission approval to continue to pursue that. Whether it would be something that you'd like to come back through the full commission or the executive committee at some point, I would take your guidance on that. But I'm really just kind of looking for, is there interest in pursuing this at this point? Does it seem like a good time to do it? And just any other comments you might have on the need for kind of developing the SEDS or other planning in response to the pandemic here.
Okay. Sounds great to me. Does anyone have any questions to Patrick about this program? Well, then a requested action, and I would ask for a motion to authorize the executive director and staff to develop application to U.S. Economic Development Administration for SEDS planning with applicable local and regional partners. Is there a motion to that effect?
Moved.
Second.
Second.
Got those, Patrick?
I do. Yes, sir.
Okay. Just want to make sure. It's hard in this format, you know, it's a little more difficult. Just want to make sure. Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing, let's have a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Butler?
Aye.
Mayor Coiner?
Aye.
Mr. Crozier?
Aye.
Mr. Curry?
Aye.
Mr. Eggertson?
Aye.
Mr. Hively?
Aye.
Mr. Hobbs?
Sorry. Aye.
Mr. McCullough?
Aye.
Mayor Roby?
Aye.
Ms. Schaefer?
Aye.
Mr. Underwood?
Aye.
Mr. Voorhees?
Aye.
Mr. Wood? Mr. Woods?
Aye.
Thank you. Unanimous vote, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And thank you all for approving that. Okay, on to the next item. As I believe you all are aware, today's the last commission meeting for our current treasurer, Mr. Jerry Wood from the town of Warrenton. As his current term runs through February the 21st, February of 2021, the commission will need to elect a new treasurer to complete the term. I will note that anyone elected would remain eligible to serve 2 additional one-year terms beyond the unexpired term. And should the commission not elect a treasurer at today's meeting, the bylaws allowed Patrick to appoint an acting treasurer pending election. Are there any questions for staff as to the role of treasurer before we ask for nominations? Would anyone that's interested or would be interested? I can tell you we've done our homework and we will have a nomination, but for anyone that's interested, are there questions as to the role of the treasurer? Hey, Patrick, would you mind just, without getting into great detail, would you mind putting a little bit of that out there anyway, even without anyone asking, just a little description of what the treasurer does for general knowledge?
Yes, sir. Couple of primary roles. One is as we go through the financial statements, I sort of, and Terry Sneed, our financial administrator, and myself, we sort of will leave it to the treasurer as to whether they would prefer to make a treasurer's report, whether they'd prefer staff to do it. So at every meeting, it could be something where the treasurer makes that report. We often will have the treasurer come in at least once or twice a month, whether it's to the commission offices or we can meet the treasurer at a location that's better suited for them to sign off on checks and to review the spending and the expenditures. So the treasurer is the primary of the double signatures on any checks that we write from the commission would be signed by myself, and then the treasurer is the primary signer there as well. And honestly, I think a lot of it that's historically been the main role, is to review expenditures, kind of sign checks, things like that. If the treasurer comes in and decides that they want to have a bigger role in the budget process or in reviewing the financials, then staff would certainly welcome that. And it's sort of been left up to each individual treasurer that's been appointed or elected by the commission.
And Patrick, is there anything there for if the treasurer's in the hospital or we have checks need to go out, is there a third? Can I sign and when the treasurer's not available, or how does that?
Yeah, both the chair and vice chair, along with the treasurer and the executive director, are the signers. I always sign the card.
I always sign the card, so I thought so. But as far as the actual procedure for going to that next person, I just wanted to put it out there. Okay. with all that in mind, I'll now open the floor for nominations for treasurer.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jack Hobbs. I have a guy who is well-known. He's amply qualified, and most importantly, he's willing. So I would nominate my friend Greg Woods from the town of Orange.
Is there a second?
This is Tom Underwood. I second.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? I don't think there's any question, but I'll take the opportunity to say I've known Greg ever since he's been involved with Orange, and I'm an accountant, and I give him my, I'll say that he was also the financial guy for Orange before he became the administrator, so town manager. So he's a finance guy, and he's perfect for the job, and as Jack said, he's willing. So that's my 2 cents worth. Anyone have anything to say?
Thanks for stepping up.
Okay, yeah, thanks for stepping up. So, okay, but then in addition to that, are there additional nominations? Hearing none, I'll close the floor to nomination, and we'll entertain the nomination to a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Butler,
Aye.
Mayor Coiner,
Aye.
Mr. Crozier,
Aye.
Mr. Curry,
Aye.
Mr. Eggertson,
Aye.
Mr. Hively,
Aye.
Mr. Hobbs,
Aye.
Mr. McCullough,
Aye.
Mayor Roby,
Aye.
Ms. Schaefer, Mr. Underwood,
Aye.
Mr. Voorhees,
Aye.
Mr. Wood, and Mr. Woods, do you accept?
Yes, or abstain too, but yes. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank everybody for that, and thank you, Greg, for stepping up. And in that regard, I don't have anything here in my notes, but I will. I want to thank Jerry publicly. I don't know what his plans are for any public service past now, but he's certainly done more than his fair share between state, local, regional. And I'd like to thank him today, not only for his great work for the commission since he's been here, but all of his wisdom and all of his lifetime work that he's done. If he continues to do public work, that's great. We'll thank him for that as well. But as of today, Jerry, I want to thank you for everything you've done for Central Virginia and the whole state of Virginia.
Well, Mayor, thank you very much. Appreciate it. It's been my honor. And as I said before, when I was in the legislature, I served on committees like general laws and labor and commerce, nominations and confirmations. And so I didn't get around to the city, counties, and towns and police, militia, and all that stuff. So I've learned a lot, and this has been a great asset to me to learn the other side of projects that I voted on and didn't know I really was voting while I was voting on them. But I do appreciate the Planning District 9 and recognize the good work that Patrick and you and all the other folks do. It's a kind of quiet type thing, but it's very, very important to the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for those words. And I think those words perfectly describe the way you approach it, which to me is the right way. And I really do appreciate your service. Okay, next is, well, I might have to turn the page for that, but I think okay, here we go. 4 pages here. The next item is staff requesting commission's guidance as to the format of future meetings and regarding the commission's annual meeting, usually held in late September. So what do y'all think? I mean, I'd certainly like to do an annual meeting if there's some way we can do it safely. Obviously, there probably will be in phase 3 or beyond by then, as long as we've got a big enough venue where we can have great social distancing among folks, and to have it outside where the prevailing breezes kind of make all that a whole lot easier. I miss everybody. I mean, these meetings are driving me crazy. I'm on a lot of them, and I certainly know how to do them, but I don't like them. It does provide a method to do them, so I'm glad we can. But if we can't do the annual meeting, that's fine. But I think it's a real opportunity for the region to continue to develop bonds and everything. And I just think it's a safe way to do it. I mean, we're intelligent adults. I wear masks. I assume even then we'd be wearing masks. But I'd rather look at all y'all masked in person than to continue to do virtual stuff for the next year. Well, we might have to for our meetings, but I would like to see if we could do so. I mean, it's just my 2 cents worth. And people that aren't comfortable don't have to come. But it's just that if we had to be crowded in together, I would say I definitely do not support it. So I'm still talking about being careful. I'm talking about trying to find a scenario where we have, September is really nice outside, hopefully, an outside setting or something where we can get together safely. That's just my 2 cents worth. It's been a long time. Anyone else like to talk about it? Yeah.
If I might, Mayor Coyne, the request from staff really was, I mean, it is specifically to the annual meeting, and we've begun, researching and coming up with plans just to be on the safe side. And I think we can continue to do that. Based on the rotation for this year, it would be in Orange County. So I'll probably be reaching out to you and to Mayor Roby and Mr. Woods and Mr. Crozier and Mr. Voorhees as well, just to check on potential places and have our staff do that. So we're more than willing to move forward. It's more a question of finding a place that would allow it in terms of the social distancing, like you say, just based on whatever the rules or whatever the requirements would be at that time. The second one would be, and not to step on the commission's discussion, but the second one would be for the August meeting. I mean, we're kind of muddling through this meeting and as others have through Zoom, but I guess I would just want some direction from the commission if we're at a point where we can, have in-person meetings with more than, 20 people in a room. For us, what that really means is we can't make use of the conference room because we wouldn't have the ability to set up social distancing there. But I would certainly be willing to either take recommendations from the commission as to locations where we could hold an in-person meeting in August. I think, as you say, I think that's preferable for some of these meetings as we move forward. So just those 2 things are what we're seeking direction on from you all.
Would Culpeper County facility, only 20 of us, or so, couldn't we spread out enough in their facility or not? Or would they be willing to host us or allow us to use their meeting room? I don't know the size there of either that or an auditorium somewhere, where we could really space out.
John, do you want to comment on what we're doing at our meetings and whether we'd have space available this time under things?
Yes, sir, Mr. Underwood. At our next board meeting, we're actually going to have in high school auditorium to be really spread out. But I think this commission could potentially meet in our regular boardroom, possibly. I'm certainly willing to host that and work with Patrick on the right venue. But, I think even our boardroom, and I welcome Mr. Underwood's comment, but I think even our boardroom might accommodate a meeting like this one.
I agree.
If we can get the right distance and we're all wearing masks, I would feel safe. And I'm an old fat guy who's very vulnerable. So if we're wearing masks and have distance, I feel comfortable. I'm not scared of this. I'm just trying to do the smart thing. I think some people are scared, which is fine. I probably should be. I'm not. But that doesn't mean, most people who aren't scared aren't respecting it. I totally respect it. So I wear a mask without fail and do all the right stuff. But if we can have distance and masks, I think we'd be okay. Appreciate y'all hosting.
Chairman Coyner?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, on both of these subjects, if for some reason Culpeper is not able to host, I believe that we have a couple of venues in Orange that we'd be able to host the meeting as a backup. And secondly, I believe that we have a very large number of venues in Orange that we can accommodate either in pavilions or in enclosed structures for the annual meeting. And I'd be more than happy to, myself and staff, get with Patrick and his staff to accommodate that, but I think we should absolutely have our annual meeting.
Yeah, I think it's really important to this group to have that. So I appreciate you stepping up there. Certainly, I'd want to do our regular meetings if we can in Culpeper, just for the regional, for the centralness of it, for Rappahannock and Fauquier, So an emergency, I guess, anywhere, but certainly for convenience, central. So if we can do something to Culpeper, that's great. And they said the rotation goes to Orange for the annual. So yes, whatever you can do to help us with that, that would be wonderful. Appreciate it. Okay, Patrick, is that what I mean, we could get more input here, but.
No, unless there's dissenting opinions, I think that's good for me.
Okay. It all seems so logical. It doesn't seem like something to go back and forth on. Okay, folks. I believe we've hit on everything here except for the regional roundtable. And I'll just say that whereas we typically talk about what's going on in our communities, and we can still do that, to really get to the focus of what we're trying to accomplish here in our localities as well as at the regional level is our local uses of the CARES Act. And so there's kind of a request from staff and myself that during the regional roundtable, it's much simpler to move through in person, of course. And it's one item that I'd be interested in hearing about would be local uses of the CARES Act funding and where each of your localities are in that process. But certainly open this time up to any items that you may wish to discuss or apprise the membership of. I think if it's standard reimbursement for the CARES Act, I guess we're all on top of that. So where we are in the process, and also I think really innovative ways is what you might be interested in, Patrick, because there's some things proposed that kind of catch me off guard. You go, oh yeah, that's interesting. But I see 90%, we all kind of are in the same place. But so we'll start it now. Patrick, I'm going to let you kind of chair this. I usually do going around the room, but you've got all the names and numbers. And Patrick, I'm going to let you handle the roundtable.
Okay, happy to do that. Maybe we'll start with just Fauquier County. Mr. McCullough or Mr. Butler, I don't know if either of you have any items on CARES Act or just other items you want to do for the roundtable.
Yeah, Paul McCullough. We got about 5.2 million under the CARES Act fund money, and the board at its last meeting adopted a resolution that allocated approximately about half of that money. The vast majority of that, $1.2 million going towards broadband and continuity connectivity efforts to get our school children and our businesses more able to telecommute. The other main chunk of that, about $1.6 million, is tentatively allocated to the school system for them purchasing Chromebooks for their students, which is about a third of the amount that they actually need to do all of their school children. But it's my understanding they're making a request to the PATH Foundation also, and are going to try to come up money with themselves. Otherwise, the board was very interested in me canvassing our local nonprofits who do food distribution to the poor and needy, and so we've reached out to them. There is some money that's been allocated towards businesses, microloans to businesses, and also PPE for businesses. But those are the big ones that we're looking at doing right now. We do have a question in and are trying to clarify whether or not we could reimburse ourselves from our landfill perspective from the tipping fees that we've experienced as a result of the coronavirus. We've had a marked increase in the amount of trash that's being deposited by people who are using, I believe, their telecommuting time also to do a number of home improvement projects. But we haven't gotten an answer back on that. So that's where we are on that. I also do want to say that we had this weekend a COVID-19 testing center opened for anybody who wanted to come. We wanted to thank the town of Warrenton for everything they've done. They allowed the use of the wharf on that. We had 16 people tested, and we had 2 positives out of those numbers, which is a very low number, which is good from the Virginia perspective and from our perspective. So I'm not sure exactly what to make of those numbers other than we didn't have that many testing positive. So that's it from Fauquier right now.
I'd like to intercede about what Paul said, and just as leaders, I hope we'll all step up on social media or in person or whatever platforms we have. Virginia is still going down, and we're doing good. And the governor's probably going to take us into phase 3 next week, July 1st. But nationally, it's really ramping up in areas. And I think a lot of it's from young people that basically think with all the phasing out of restrictions, the crisis is over and they don't feel that vulnerable anyway. And they may not be getting sick, although I'm starting to see deaths. We've had a first teenager death, I think, and more in the 20s nationally. And so they're not invulnerable. And at the very least, they're going to be spreading it to their grandparents and parents. So while we ramp up our economic response and try and get something like normal, we as leaders have to continue to stress staying safe, because everywhere I go, I'm the only guy with a mask, it seems like. And I'm just scared it's all going to flare up again because everybody's acting like there's no disease anymore. So let's not fall asleep on this. I'd hate for it to ramp up again in Virginia and hurt our economy even worse. So let's all step up as leaders. All right, Patrick. Sorry, I had to say that when he mentioned the.
Yeah, I'd like to just follow up on that once also. It's very interesting, but the new numbers that we're beginning to see, especially out of Virginia, but also the U.S., is that while it was believed that the elderly, those of us over 60, in which I fall obviously, would be the most vulnerable to this, actually the numbers coming in right now are showing that the 40 to 49 year range and the 50 to 59 range are now experiencing more hospitalizations and death than those of us in the 60 and plus range. And I think it's because, as Mayor Corner has said, Bob has said, they're not treating it like it really is a problem, and it's beginning to whack them. So I'm with Mayor Corner. We need to be out there in front reminding people that we have a problem here, and you got to keep wearing your mask and you got to keep socially distancing. Otherwise, we're going to end up like some of the other states around the union where they've seen a huge increase. So,
and you know, I think the reason it was so many in the 70s and 80s at first was because of the nursing homes. Like half of our deaths have been nursing homes. So actually our elderly have been very good about quarantining and staying away from it. So if you take the nursing homes away from it, there are very few incidents really over 60 and 70 because they're smart and they've been staying away. The nursing homes have had a problem. So the ones that are out there running around acting a little sillier, you have the 40 and 50 somethings as far as being vulnerable. And then the younger ones always, but they're not quite as vulnerable. So the thing I would say here is when the state and the federal do it, it's political. It's Republican, Democrat, everybody's screaming, everybody's saying you're for the economy, you're taking my liberties away. Everything's political. I think when local leaders speak out and we're talking about safety for the community, I think we have the advantage of doing it without as much political angle. So we have the most, I think, credibility on this as far as getting more reaction. I think if the governor, or of course he can demand certain things, but as far as doing it to be in his stead or out of respect, I think we're at the lead on that. So let's take it. Let's take it. Patrick.
Yes, sir. Mr. Butler, I didn't know if you had anything from the county.
Butler had to drift off to a business-related meeting for his business, so okay. He does send his best.
Great. Ms. Schaefer or Mr. Wood from Warrenton?
Patrick, I would yield to Ms. Schaefer and let her tell us what all has been going on, if she doesn't mind. But, you know, you're talking about the viruses and different things. Some of us older folks who have been around for a number of viruses, and some of us can remember the polio viruses and giving out the sugar cubes and things like that.
I remember.
And, you know, we in the medical profession, we make mistakes. And, you know, we've never said that it's an exact science. That's why they call it the practice of medicine. All along, it's always referred to as the practice. So young folks ought to realize that, you know, it's kind of feel as you go system. It's new to everybody, even though we have a lot of people that are really knowledgeable in viruses and everything. It's still experimental in a lot of cases. And again, as I said, it's the the practice of medicine. And the two most important things are wearing a mask and keeping your distances. And as the beaches and all these places open back up, it can be done. Just use a little common sense.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for allowing me to be on this commission. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, here in Warrenton, I'm sure it's like everyone else, it's been a little busy. We've had, in addition to the COVID testing center and the virus, we've also had several rallies and events here that have kept us pretty busy. We have had some local political rallies specifically on the virus. We had some reopen rallies and some things that have happened. So we have been facing some of that in addition to the virus. As for the CARES Act, we have been looking at areas where we're looking to spend that and opportunities. Right now, I would say the majority of our efforts are concentrated around technology. So in specific things, monitoring from home, the sewer and water plant, we don't have that capability right now. And I know Paul's done the same, including chip readers at all of our front counters, looking for some automated pay systems. We're also looking at a lot of contract tracing. We do have the thermometers in place in our building, so taking temperatures in and out and doing some of those things, not required but suggested. And in phase 3 for our aquatics facility, that is required. So we're looking at those. We're also looking at some scanning and automation of old records, outsourcing that as a way to be able to access things from when you're away and teleworking and working from home. So I would say the majority of our effort right now around the CARES Act is really focusing on the role of technology and working from a distance. So that is where we have been spending our effort. We did move somebody over from our utilities department that had a degree in emergency services. So we've staffed that position full time, and I've been told that that position and the entire funding and salary for that is eligible. So some of those things as well have been put in place. But other than that, nothing too specific. We've started the conversation and we have an MOU with Fauquier County that I'll be executing probably this week and sending back over to them. And the council has made the budget appropriation as of last month. So we have everything in place to get started. It's my understanding that the auditors panel met this morning. I don't know if anybody else heard that as well. So Virginia Tech had their call, and during that call, they said that the auditor panel was meeting. So it's our understanding that our auditors will be the ones that sign off on what's eligible for the CARES Act. And a group of them were meeting this morning to discuss some questions that were still outstanding. I know we all got some information from VML yesterday that was also helpful. So that's where we are on it. Maybe some of you are further ahead than me, but that's where Warrenton is right now.
Thanks, Brandy.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Curry, Rappahannock County.
Thank you. Yeah, like Fauquier, a good chunk is dedicated to our schools and their technology needs, those that they've already confronted this school year, and then those that they anticipate going forward. Beyond that, we're looking at innovative ways to tackle projects that we knew were in the pipeline anyway, that we know we can get done by December 30th, while using a hefty dose of caution to make sure we don't have anything clawed back. I'm very interested to hear what everybody's doing and continue to do, so we can borrow your ideas and then have a number of us in the same boat when it comes time for somebody to question whether it was appropriate or not.
Thank you. Mr. Egerton or Mr. Underwood, Culpeper County?
I can start, Patrick. We are, as I mentioned earlier, having our first in-person board meeting on July the 7th at our high school auditorium, and super excited to actually have everybody in the same room. And that happens to be the day where we'll make some decisions about our CARES funding. So it's very much a work in progress right now. We are certainly looking at we got about $4.5 million, about 1.6 of that went to the town of Culpeper, and 2.9 remains with the county. So I'll be presenting a proposal to the board that we'll put a good chunk of that into business relief efforts, and then cover the gamut from, supplies, PPE, cleaning. We've actually contracted with our cleaning contractors to add a full-time person at the courthouse, so that could be covered. There's certainly consideration of the homelessness problem, our volunteer fire and rescue, and a number of other categories. So I've actually got a fairly robust plan, but no decisions will be made before July the 7th.
That's a good summary. I don't have anything to add.
Thank you both. Mr. Hively, Town of Culpeper.
Yes, as John said, 1.6 million is coming to the town, and we made it fairly simple. We're going to push 100% of that to a small business grant program. We're currently in an education phase with businesses right now. That'll be about a 3-week period. We'll do education and receiving interest type documents from the businesses. And then after the 4th of July, we'll have a 1-week period where we will be receiving the applications from the businesses, and then following with an award after that.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chris, this is Brandy. I had a quick question on that business relief. I was told by our town attorney that had to go through an economic development authority. Did you not find that, or are you doing that?
It can either go through the IDA or EDA, or we're actually contracting with a company, and the funds will be going through that organization. And I don't know the particulars. It may have to go to it may end up going to an EDA before it goes to them, but they're working that out right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I had heard the similar thing, Ms. Schaefer, and the group that Culpeper is working with is the Community Investment Collaborative, which is based out of Charlottesville, and they've got similar programs. I think they're setting some up maybe with a couple of the Charlottesville area counties, Fluvanna and others, but I do know that it has to be that third party, whether it's an EDA, it just can't be the local government itself is what the guidance I've got, which is probably the same you have. So, Mr. Hobbs, Madison County.
Yes, this CARES Act business is still a hot topic here. We're still in study mode. We made our first presentation of a preliminary list yesterday evening, so we got some feedback out of that. Suffice it to say, we're going to claim what we've already spent against that pot of money and probably reserve some amount for PPE going forward and all that. Everybody else has gone first and said everything is clever, but we want to try to take some of that money and buy a COVID-ready ambulance if we can actually get that ordered in here before the deadline passes. We also are seeing some extra transfer station costs that need to be quantified, so we need to do some homework on that so we can cover those costs. We're also talking about a business assistance program with details to be determined, but I do suspect that a good chunk of Madison County's money will go to the schools for Chromebooks and standing up new hotspot sites around the county where we don't have good internet. So that's what I have.
All right, Mr. Voorhees or Mr. Crozier, Orange County.
So I'll step in at the risk of sharing something that my chairman doesn't know about. This is only a working conversation, right, Jim? I have actually briefed the board in some broad terms, but we are actually finalizing our draft today and tomorrow, and we'll get that out to the board for their consideration at their first July board meeting. And so it comes in sort of 4 flavors. we're going to cover direct costs that we've already spent and that we're projecting through the end of the year. And those are things like converting desktops to laptops, adding server capacity or licenses to Microsoft software or Zoom or WebEx and all that sort of stuff. The idea being we're preparing for telework and we're paying for the ability to do telework. That does include some other software like records management type things that, you know, otherwise you can't access because you're doing everything with paper files. So we sort of have that also in that direct cost bundle, cleaning, additional staff and supplies for cleaning. We're setting aside some funds to test all of our employees. We're not sure if we're going to do that and whether that'll be, you know, the active virus or the antibody testing, but that's something that folks are considering. So we got a placeholder for that. Also, we're paying for all our quarantining costs that we've already done for, you know, EMS and such, and we anticipate we may have to do some more of that. So we have a placeholder for that. And then adaptations for buildings and vehicles. Many of our sheriff's vehicles, you know, had cloth seats. Now we're going to put those kind of washout vinyl or hard surface seats and shields and that sort of stuff. So that's our kind of direct cost bundle. Then we have a reopening grant bundle, which is along the lines of what Culpeper's doing. And we are in conversation with CIC, the nonprofit out of Charlottesville. We've been talking about maybe a couple $100,000 in that bundle. We're still talking about how to right size that. Another bundle is support for partner agencies. So is that, you know, we still are unclear as to whether our jails, some of our nonprofits like our volunteer fire departments, the chambers, 4-H, you know, all these people are kind of wondering if they can get a piece of this to kind of help tide them over. And so we've got kind of a bucket there that we're looking at. And we're also thinking about placing some money with a nonprofit that can help folks with utility payments or rent payments. You know, I guess that gets to that housing issue. We don't quite have the same level of issue, but if folks end up in eviction trouble coming up soon, perhaps there'll be a chance for some help there. And then the final bundle is in the broadband area. We could probably spend the whole amount on broadband with shovel-ready projects because we've already got miles of fiber under construction. But that's kind of our way of just kind of wrapping it up, make sure we don't leave anything on the table because we have a number of projects that are under construction right now. And our total is $3.2 million. 500,000 and change will go to the town of Orange, and 100,000 change will go to Gordonsville.
Mr. Crozier?
I really don't have anything to add. I think Mr. Voorhees did a great job, and I just want to note we're very happy to have him on board in Orange County.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Mr. Woods or Mayor Roby, Town of Orange?
Yeah. Martha, I can take this for a little bit. We're looking into pretty much the same things as everybody else is. I will say on the cleaning and disinfecting, so to speak, we got a lot of older buildings, so we're looking at all of our ductwork as well as putting in UV systems where we don't have it. I don't know if that will qualify, but if not, we need to do it anyway. The majority of the money we expect to be put into grants for the local businesses. We haven't worked all that out yet. We're hoping to have a meeting where we can sit down and discuss some of this. We just haven't really had it yet. But our plan, or the initial plan that we haven't totally agreed to yet because we haven't presented it, but we have an IDA that we're talking about reactivating to pass this through. Other than that, it's pretty much the same. I will say that our police chief has done very well toward getting stuff and disinfecting our police vehicles as well as our public works vehicles. That's about all that I have.
Thanks, Greg. Mayor Roby, I don't know if you're still on audio or not. All right, sounds like not. So, all right, Mayor Coyne, we move north to south here, so you're going to wrap us up.
Okay. I've got a question and a comment. My comment or promotion is we're actually going to do on July 3rd, our downtown merchants are going to do July the 4th, but they're going to do it on July 3rd when the official vacation, date is to celebrate it. They're going to have hot dog trucks, ice cream truck, music, so bands. And I think the only fireworks are going to be, they're going to hand out sparklers and things, but I don't know if we're going to ask them to take them home with them and do it at home rather than there for safety issues. There shouldn't be any choke points anywhere, so there should be broad distancing, available, and everybody will have masks available and everything else. So it's meant to be done safe and not so like some of the silly things I've seen around the country. But I think people do want to get out, and with people that are trying to provide a safe environment. I will say, I'm sure the ice cream truck is great, but if you're ever driving through Gordonsville and you see the hot dog guy sets up a truck right off Main Street like 3 or 4 days a week. If you ever go into Richmond or going through, pull over and get a hot dog, even if it's 9 o'clock in the morning, eat it later. But they are the best hot dogs in the world. And take it home, keep it in your car and eat it 2-3 hours later. But do not pass through Gordonsville without getting that. I mean, people could say, let's go out and get a steak or some seafood tonight. I'd say, can we have hot dogs instead? Because it's like the best thing in the world. You put one in your mouth and you go, oh my God, is this a hot dog? Seriously. Okay. So that's the sale on that. So come over to Gordonsville. Got a question for you guys, though. We obviously want to help our businesses. We're very pro-business in Gordonsville. The town of Orange grew up as the government seat, and they were the government. And the town of Gordonsville historically was a town of shops. Not currently against Orange. They probably have twice as many as us. They're bigger and they're wonderful. And I support Orange. I'm over there all the time spending my money. But historically, so we really do want to support our businesses. But here's the thing I've got about that. If we put money aside that could have been used for reimbursements, legitimate reimbursements, whether it's our fire department, whether it's our town, whatever, if we could have spent all of our money on things that citizens, that will end up either now or in the future come out of the citizens' pockets. We've got a lot of little old ladies that honestly living on Social Security. Now, you know how much you get on Social Security if you're older, and if you don't, look it up. But it's not much. And a lot of them, just because they lost their husbands before they planned for it or saved or whatever. I'm an accountant, so I do a lot of people's taxes and confide in me for the ones I don't. So anyway, I just know we have a lot of citizens that are living off Social Security. And we have a lot of vendors that, I'll say shop owners, whatever, that are quite well off. Now, they don't want to throw the money down. They don't want to lose $5,000 a month forever in their shop. So it's not like they're that wealthy. But I'm asking you guys, is a net worth question on these grants allowable? A net worth. It can be really broad, not like tell me exactly what you're worth, but something like, is it less than $250,000, not counting your home or personal property? So we're getting into investments. Real broad. So if it's over 250, whether they're worth $3 million or $300,000, they'd be over it. I've got a problem transferring money that could go for a little old lady that has to not eat the last 3 days of the month till her Social Security check, to give money to a person that's worth $3 million. I got a problem with that. Now they might complain they're not making as much money, but some of these people have serious private funds. Anyway, so that's my issue. I want to support them, but daggone it, can we get into net worth and the application process on these funds? Y'all tell me that. I don't know. Anybody know? Is that a legitimate question? Is it a legal question? I know for me, it's a serious question. I would feel like an idiot taking money from a little lady with no money and giving it to somebody worth $5 million. That seems crazy to me. I know they didn't want to lose the money they lost the last 3 months, but they've got the money to lose. Some of them. And if the other ones don't, for all the ones that, hey, I'm not trying to make them poor. If they're worth $200,000, I'll give them the money. They don't have to be broke. They just can't be extremely wealthy and hand over to them. So some sort of, does that bother you guys at all as far as handing these monies out to the businesses, knowing who you're dealing with?
Well,
no takers.
Mayor, since you're asking for a response, I hear you. I think the challenge is to create a process that's as streamlined and flexible and quick, as possible. The more complexity you put in the application, the more difficult it is to administer. But that's not to say that we don't plan on having some thresholds, like you said. The other thing to think about is, we are planning to have some funding that might address the population that you've just identified, some help with rent, some help with utilities that the quote unquote little old lady could access. So we are trying to provide something for both populations in the orange.
Okay. See, that might be the answer, Ted, is to do for both, and that way you wouldn't have to get into class warfare. You could just do something for both.
When we went, when Fauquier looked at somewhat of this question, what we ended up deciding to do was allocating money to our social services department because for their emergency relief fund, so that they already have a set criteria, etc., and they deal with people on sliding scales and other ways. So we felt that they would be the appropriate one who could help people who are in could potentially lose their home or in necessitous circumstances. So we went that way on the sort of money towards individuals. In regards to businesses, we did a micro loan project with some of the money through our EDA, and it's my understanding in regards to that there was some broad, vague criterias regarding the business and the net worth of the business to try to ensure that two things, one of which was that we weren't giving it to, ExxonMobil, but on the other hand, the business we were giving it to, it was capable of surviving through this if we were going to give them funds to help them make it through. I don't know as much about that because it went through the EDA, but I do know that with money towards individual people and people who might have concerns about food and rent and heating and electricity, we push that money to our social services division.
Hey, Paul, I appreciate that. I would just say that I think we've got two different types of groups that need money in town. You've got groups that have mastered the system and are looking to maximize their return on anything available at any organization, any place, anytime. And you've got some old school people who've never taken a dime from anybody, and you'd have to probably twist the arm to give them take a penny. They're the ones that actually go hungry the last 4 days a month because they don't work the system. They won't ask anybody for anything, and social services has never heard of them. I know the situation, and I know from friends, they'll say, well, they'll invite them out to dinner the last couple months of the month, a couple of days of the month, because they know they have a hard time finding money for food, but they would never go to social services in a million years. And these are people in their 70s and 80s, 90s that never have and never would. So we'd have to do a combination somehow to reach out to those people. But yeah, I like your idea about social services in general. Okay.
Bob, one of the things we did is we just had a free taco night in conjunction with the county and Fuck Your Fish. And so maybe it's something like that where it was kind of, you could drive through. They had some pre-made meals to go home and tacos for dinner that night. You didn't have to have or prove or do anything. It was just a free taco night. And then the marketing and the effort was targeted to the groups we needed to. So that was kind of one thing we did. So maybe the last 4 days of the month, having some kind of food drive kind of component.
And maybe helping on their water bill as well. If we help on their water bill or something, then maybe they could buy food. But yeah, something like that. Somehow outreach directly. Thank you, guys. Any other comments on that? Anyone like to make any comments about anything before we adjourn? Well, thank you all for attending. I'm glad we can see most of each other, most faces on the call, and I appreciate your participation, and I hope to see you soon at the annual meeting. And I guess before then, I'll see you in August. Thank you. We're adjourned. We don't need to vote for it. I'm declaring it. We're adjourned.